My name is Dane Wigington, Geoengineering watchdog of our site. I think a lot of you are familiar with that. This is not a job I wanted. It's simply something I felt had to be done once I became aware of what was happening in the skies above our heads. A lot of people are trying to ignore this issue right now. Based on how fast things are unraveling, they will not be able to ignore things for much longer. The point of this presentation today, denial, deception, the last chance for life on Earth, for many that might sound very alarmist and very theatrical. It's not. It's not. If we look at hard data right now, it is astounding how quickly things are unfolding, and we are not being told. So I'll elaborate further as we go into the presentation. As we see aircraft like this, normal condensation trails do not immediately emit from the back of an aircraft, and certainly they're not plumes like that. There's a cooling zone between the back of an aircraft and a normal condensation trail, and the high bypass turbofan jet engine, by design, is not conducive to producing such trails. So again, when we have trails like that, we know that that's not condensation. You can't slice a bit out of the middle of a trail. This film footage here is very compelling. It's from a site called Tanker Enemy in Italy. If you look closely, there are two jets there, not one. They're AWAC tankers, one turns off, keep watching, gets more compelling. And this is where the argument ends. People ask, how do you prove this? How can I prove it to someone who doesn't want to listen? We have film footage of them spraying, period. You can see the other aircraft there, see the wing and the plume, keep watching. This is how we prove it. Because we have film footage of these aircraft spraying at altitude, period. End of the argument. It's over. Now, anybody who says that's a condensation trail is simply in another reality. It's not condensation. We know this is happening. It's the biggest elephant in the room right now. It's the biggest untold story on the planet. Words from a dying Earth. Yes. From a dying planet. Is our planet dying? Yes. Our planet's absolutely dying, very rapidly. And there's a great deal of things fueling the fire. I chose this issue because it's simply the largest single assault on all life on Earth, bar none. There's a lot of challenges we face, but climate engineering is quantitatively doing the most damage of all. Earth threatened with 6 mass extinction. We are in the 6th great mass extinction now, today. This is a statistical fact. It's not projection, it's not theory. We're losing some 200 species a day of plant and animal right now. That's 10,000 times background extinction rate. Now, a lot of people in the anti-climate engineering movement want to believe that there's nothing wrong with the planet, there's no warming, it's all a hoax, it's only the spraying. This is simply not true. Too many people want to think dichotomously. It's either a this or that equation. That's not reality. There's so many sources of anthropogenic damage to the planet, one could never quantify it. Climate engineering, again, I believe is the largest single cause, but we put almost, I believe the latest figure is 100 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every single day. And anyone who thinks that's not a problem is not clear about reality. Climate engineering, again, is making a very bad situation exponentially worse, but it is by no means the only thing affecting the climate. That's about, I think we're 30 plus billion tons a year of CO2. 3 years since Fukushima nuclear power road to our extinction. Could Fukushima end life on Earth? Yes, it could. Right now, that situation is completely out of control. Again, I'm pointing out more forms of anthropogenic damage to the planet, and Fukushima certainly is. How is aerosol geoengineering making that worse? Aerosol geoengineering can migrate moisture a lot farther than it would have otherwise migrated. That could, in theory, migrate some of the fallout from Fukushima farther over the continental U.S. So again, all things are tied together, but I'm pointing out that there's a great many forms of anthropogenic damage to our planet. Now, anybody that thinks that's normal or that that's commercial traffic, again, needs to rethink their reality. Nothing normal about that. We know this. We know this over Shasta County. We have east-west massive spray plumes, and we have no east-west traffic ever. We have 10 times the amount of aircraft in the air, literally, on days when we see that in our skies. So again, there's no speculation. We have film of this going on. This man I felt was very touching, and because people around the world are being harmed horrifically from a lack of rain. And we know the aerosols cause this lack of rain. The science is extremely clear on this. When you aerosolize the atmosphere, too many condensation nuclei affects the hydrological cycle radically. That rain that doesn't fall in one place tends to migrate somewhere else and come down in a deluge. We see this as well. We have the drought and deluge cycle intensifying around the globe. And a lot of causes for this, again, I'm not saying climate engineering is the only cause for a disrupted hydrological cycle by any means. But in fact, if we look mathematically, it appears to be the single greatest cause for a disruption in the hydrological cycle. Around the globe, I don't know if any of you have seen in Bosnia, Serbia, we've had massive, massive flooding. Also China, which not even the Chinese news is covering, 25,000 homes just wiped out. And the Chinese news isn't even covering this. Again, they're trying to hide this issue as much as they can. That's the sort of planet we're heading for, again, as the hydrological cycle is disrupted, ozone layer is shredded. We are on track for something now called Venus syndrome. I'll elaborate on that in a while. This is a picture from Bosnia. This just happened. Now, the Bosnian people, I can tell you this, and I have contacts there. They believe that they are the victims of weather warfare. They absolutely believe this. They have ionosphere heater installations in Bosnia and Serbia that they know of now. The people are quite aware there. So when you have ionosphere heaters whose purpose appears to be to manipulate weather patterns in the jet stream, why would they not think this? And they've been hit with absolutely unprecedented flooding. People who think this isn't going on, this is all fringe, and certainly our society's been trained to think that anything that's not the official narrative is fringe. We have record of John F. Kennedy talking about weather control in 1961, 53 years ago. This is historical record, historical fact. I have an 80-page document from the NASA archives outlining the U.S. weather mod programs as of 1966 with budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars for anybody to look at. Media chooses not to. Weather is a force multiplier. Many of you have heard of this document, but this is a research paper outlining the U.S. military's goal to, quote, own the weather, period, as a force multiplier. Weather warfare has always been sought after by the militaries. Now, to try to quantify how fast the planet's warming, again, there's no debate. The reality is what it is, and no matter what argument anybody presents, those are the facts, period. It's not about liking Al Gore. It's not about wanting carbon credits. It's about reality. The planet's warming at absolutely unprecedented speed, equivalent to 4 Hiroshima bombs every second. That's about 400,000 a day. Try to get your arms around how fast the planet's warming. It's difficult to, but that's statistical fact. Now, everybody remembers the polar vortex, and this is an image from January 6th, and you see the cold zone pressed down into just those areas, and we've seen jet stream patterns that are absolutely unprecedented. You have the meteorological community scratching their heads about this, but when we have enough data to know that the ionosphere heaters can in fact heat the ionosphere, and that can in fact steer the jet stream, why would we think this is not going on? And the people in the East think that the whole world is cold. You can see the whole world is not cold. You have a very cold zone in the eastern U.S., and I think that was part of the plan to skew media in that direction. Now, these are temperature graphs. This is from the Arctic Methane Emergency Group. It's a group of scientists that are sounding the alarm. And you must sift the baby from the bathwater, because although the Arctic Methane Emergency Group data is accurate, they're calling for geoengineering, many of them, as if it hasn't been going on for 60 years already. Everyone has to learn to sift the baby from the bathwater, but that doesn't mean that their data and their projections are not accurate, because they appear to be some of the most accurate. And what this shows is we could be looking at a 6-7 degrees C temperature rise by 2030. And right now what we see, every place we monitor, we're seeing an underreporting of temperatures, 3, 4, 5 degrees lower than the actual temperature on the ground. So it appears already it's much harder than we're being told. Now, this is Arctic ice breakup. I want you to look at the sky, because it appears that they've been geoengineering heavily over the poles for probably as much as 6 decades. We have studies even from Stanford from the 50s talking about an Arctic haze and metallic particles detected, and they could not determine where those particles were coming from. Does the left hand not know what the right hand is doing? And we know these programs were going on back that far. We have patents for chemical ice nucleation assigned to the U.S. military going back to 1950. So when we have skies like that, we see the same thing here now, aerosolization. Why would they do this over the poles? Because we're losing Earth's albedo. The ice on both poles is the regulating mechanism for the planet, period. Ice reflects about 90% of the sun's incoming thermal energy. Seawater absorbs 90+%, 93% according to this chart. So once we lose the ice, the ocean heats exponentially faster. As the oceans heat, methane hydrate is releasing from the sea floor. It's happening now. The East Laptev Sea in the Arctic is moving closer to a methane geyser. In fact, it's there already. So the more ice we lose, the more the water heats, the more methane releases, which is covering the planet like a layer of glass. Methane is 100 times more potent than CO2 over a 10-year time horizon. You'll always hear the scientific community referring to it as being 20 times more potent. That's over a 100-year time horizon. We're looking at much more immediate time frames. So methane escape could seal the fate of life on Earth if enough methane gets out, and we're headed that direction now. Again, in the illustration, methane deposits on the seafloor, ocean heats, methane surfaces. This also acidifies the ocean, also contributes to the fish die-offs, of which we've seen dozens around the globe this month alone. This is a chart on atmospheric methane. You see from 1951 to 1980, the chart on your right, and we see as of even November 10, and it's much worse now even, you see how much more dark color you have. Methane is saturating the atmosphere at absolutely unprecedented speed right now. This is a headline from about 3 weeks ago. Didn't get much airtime on public media, which should be of interest to people. CNN gave this story 15 seconds, and then they went on to 10 minutes of Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton. So they have 10 minutes for that, but they only have 15 seconds to say, oh, by the way, we're locked into at least 15 feet of sea level rise. 80 of the world's top 100 cities, or largest 100 cities, are now virtually doomed. So again, it shows the media has moved away from trying to pronounce global warming and simply to try to hide it. That helps to sell geoengineering, helps to keep the populations calm so that they're not worried about their Florida McMansion on the coast going underwater. That's where we're headed. There's no question about that. It's already a problem in many island nations around the globe. HARP, and we have a lot of stories from the government trying to downplay the use of these installations. If they're not using them, why are they still building so many? In fact, we just see there's protests in Japan right now because in Kyoto, Japan, the U.S. military is installing a base with another SBX radar system, which we believe is a part of the overall global network of these systems to help manipulate weather. This is happening right now in Kyoto. So clearly they're using these installations because they keep building them. Now, this is on radar. We see this a lot. In fact, if you see on Weather Channel, a lot of times the big donuts will pop up, and those are radar readings, but we see a lot of this when there appears to be weather manipulation going on. These RF transmitters are all around the planet. So again, if they are not used with weather modification, why are there so many? Why do we see them so often? And why do we see the sort of signature that we would expect if they are using these? I mean, the sort of cloud alignment that we see often. Another film of RF frequency. And these sorts of weather manipulation techniques are named in patents. So again, when we have dots that connect perfectly, why would we think this is not going on? This is a network of the ionosphere heaters around the globe. You see quite a network of them. And we know from statistical data and military publications that they can heat the ionosphere to, in some cases, tens of thousands of degrees Fahrenheit over areas of 400 or 500 square miles. The ionosphere is electrically charged. When it's hit with that much power, it causes a chain reaction. So again, the things that are going on in the atmosphere for experimentation are quite lethal. Project Lucy, this is where the insanity gets worse. As the methane is releasing, geoengineering, when you aerosolize the atmosphere, it changes upper level wind currents. That in turn can affect ocean currents. Now we have warm water pumping straight into the Arctic up the North Atlantic. Now the methane release, as I mentioned, Project Lucy is, again, we're told a proposal, just like we're told climate engineering is a proposal, even though we see it with our own eyes. This is to use these ionosphere heaters to try to blast the atmosphere with opposing frequencies in an attempt to degrade the methane, also with unknown results. So the insanity goes from bad to worse as the equation goes along. How to cool the planet, geoengineering, and the audacious quest to fix Earth climate. How far has technology brought us so far? We're virtually off the cliff toward global extinction. So are we to continue to have faith in this sort of technology with people who pretend that this isn't going on already, which is most of academia? This is a satellite photo. I was in the Lieutenant Governor's office about 2 months ago with Gavin and his aide. And I showed him a stack of images like this where you can clearly see the entire Eastern Pacific is grid pattern sprayed. We know the science behind aerosolizing the atmosphere. Again, it diminishes and disperses precipitation. And this is the goal of climate engineering, to create an artificial marine layer to try to shade the oceans. The oceans are warming exponentially fast. A cubic meter of seawater contains 4,000 times the thermal energy of a cubic meter of air. Once the water's warm, there's no turning it off. And that's happening. So we see this grid pattern. We know we're not getting any rain in California. And you know what? We have yet to see any action from any agency, let alone any politician. Clouds caused by aircraft exhaust may warm the U.S. climate. Now here's where the equation gets very interesting. So here's geoengineering that's, we're told, is to cool the planet, and indeed they can create large cooled zones, but we know the overall effect is a worsened warming. And we know putting particulates in the atmosphere shreds ozone. We know that. It doesn't matter if it's a volcano or a jet aircraft. So here you have NASA admitting it's fueling the warming, and yet we see the spraying increasing around the globe. Engineered snowstorms, what are they spraying? Now, this is where a lot of people's ability to comprehend this becomes strained. Can they engineer an artificial snowstorm? We know they can. The Chinese media openly announced it. The Chinese government openly announced it, that they were creating snowstorms. Anybody can Google this. Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorm. Google it and see what you find. When they created a third round of these artificial snowstorms over Beijing, they did $1 billion worth of damage. The population wasn't too thrilled about it. And so the government more or less went under the radar with it. But in this particular article, which anybody can Google, I have 2 lab tests where you can see the result of putting biological ice nucleating agents in a beaker. It freezes it instantly. Same with barium hydroxide and ammonium, same result. And we know, we've tested a lot of snow samples, and we see that we have, in fact, those materials, barium, in our snow samples in copious amounts. Anybody who saw the ice balls in Lake Michigan, Google that one, 75-pound ice balls, only in the last 3 years, also appears to be a result of these programs. Methane, again, it's gassing all over the globe. I mean, we're hearing about methane deposits that we didn't even know about because now it's gassing out again. That's another sign of the warming. Methane hydrate does not release from a cooling planet, but only from a warming planet. This is a very recent map. This is, there we go, May 16th. You see the darker oranges and reds there. That's a sign of much, much warmer water, much warmer than the normal or the average. So there's no question about the warming, period. Fish die-offs. Many of you may have heard, again, as I mentioned earlier, in the last 30 days alone, there's been dozens around the globe. Authorities, again, claiming not to have any idea what's going on. But this is exactly what we'd expect from gassing from the subsea surface, where you have methane hydrate and even hydrogen sulfide. You create anoxic zones where there's no oxygen at all. And that's the only thing that can really kill that many fish that quickly, short of some massive chemical contamination, which I think they would have a hard time hiding. It wouldn't be uniform around the globe. And we know this gassing is occurring, period. Dead zones around the ocean. Oceans are dying. There's no question about that. And right now we have about 400 plus dead zones around the planet. These are anoxic zones where nothing lives, no oxygen. Some of these dead zones are as big as 10,000 square miles. You don't hear media talking about this. We just had the anchovy fleet on the West Coast return again with virtually nothing. We have seabirds now dying as of 3 days ago. We have sea mammals washing up all along the U.S. West Coast as well. Species extinction loss. This is a recent chart, but you see that trajectory pretty clear, about a 90-degree turn. So again, as I stress, we're losing 200 plus species of plant and animal a day. That's some 10,000 times background extinction rates. Geoengineering is destroying the ozone layer. We knew the UV was high, and we know from geoengineering data that any particulate in the atmosphere, whether it's from a volcano or the back of a jet, it affects ozone. When we started metering for this, and we have state-of-the-art meters, we're getting UVB levels that are 1,200% higher than we're being told. We're told by all major agencies UVB is no more than 5% of total incoming UV. We know now we're getting at least 60% UVB. UVB has horrific effects on plants, plankton, us, and everything in between. So there is no question this is indicative of a shredded ozone layer, and there's no question the UV is that high. How long can they hide it? I don't know. But I mean, at this point, when you're seeing the bark burn off of trees, and we're seeing that everywhere, UV is off the scale. Now, this is a chart that shows what geoengineering would be projected to do. You see the big temperature drops. But this is erroneous in the sense that we know geoengineering is going on. We know we have global dimming that's some 20 to 25%. That means 20 to 25% of the sun's direct rays are no longer reaching the surface of the planet. We're not getting any cooler, so clearly the notion that this could work is clearly already proven wrong. And we have geoengineers like David Keith, 10 years ago, or excuse me, in 2010, stated on the record, I was at the conference, it's on film, it's on record. where he stated we needed to put 20 million tons of aluminum nanoparticulates in the atmosphere every year. And by the time he gets to Stephen Colbert, some months back, now he's down to 20,000 tons. There's no truth to anything a lot of these people say. So they're just simply out there to try to test the water, to test public opinion. If one figure seems too high, let's just change it to something else. I mean, the amount of lies we're being fed right now are absolutely off the charts. Okay, again, this is NASA GIS map. Look closely where it's cold. Now, does that look natural to you, that you'd have one cold patch where we know some of the heaviest geoengineering is occurring, the eastern North American continent, while you see Siberia is in total meltdown? And Siberia is in total meltdown. It started burning there in April this year, early April. Siberia is normally frozen till mid-June. So why is it so cold in one spot right there? And if you look, we have the west frying. We have the high-pressure dome over the west. The jet stream was continually fed up through Alaska. Alaska had its warmest January on record. They didn't even have enough snow for the Iditarod dog sled race. So we see climate manipulation. You can't hamper the system without doing a hell of a lot of damage. That's what we see. Again, grid patterns. Anybody who thinks this is normal, it's astounding to me that this can be explained away by so-called agency people who are telling us this is condensation trails, and we have films proving it's not. So at this point, the scenario we live in where those that are supposed to protect us are simply towing the line for the power structure, it's a very sad state of affairs. Project Paperclip. I don't know how many have heard of this. This is historical fact. The Nazi scientists were divided up between the U.S. and the Soviet Union because our military did not want to lose that level of genius, however twisted it may have been. So the bottom line is, this is historical facts. A great deal of the Nazi scientists were brought here and put right back to work. Historical fact. And part of this relates to weather modification as well. Proof of U.S. military biological tests on innocent U.S. civilians. This is historical fact. Look it up. I don't want anybody to believe anything I'm saying. Look it up. We know this is fact. We have our own troops, for example, in the Gulf War I, depleted uranium, used our own soldiers. We have 180,000 sick with Gulf War syndrome. Those in the Pentagon don't give a damn about who they contaminate. I mean, at what point do we wake up and realize this is the case as we all live under a toxic cloud? You know, I'm not much on theater, but this fits. This truly fits. And, you know, and that's the kind of person that we have there that, and he's typical for what we see in the Pentagon. And this is an image that stays with you. The allergy epidemic by 2015, half of U.S. may be carrying one of these. Every other commercial, asthma, COPD, we know we have NOAA admitting that in the last 10 years we have an atmosphere that's now full of particulates and they can't identify where they're all coming from. Doesn't that hit anybody as astounding that they would have no clue? And the bottom line is we are breathing this stuff, and why doesn't air quality detect it? Because the particles, according to geoengineering patents, and it matches our testing. I paid a lot of money for some tests to try to test down to 0.1 microns, which is much smaller than what air quality tests for. Still couldn't sift out any particulates from a sample we knew had aluminum in it. And if they are nanoparticulates of the size of the patent state, none of the air quality equipment, to my knowledge, will detect it when they're looking for at best 2.5 microns. So it goes under the radar, and we continue to breathe it, and the smaller the particle, the more harmful it is to the human organism. Now, this is astounding. Planning for your future care. This sent to us from UK. This is for a cancer care planning guide. What a nice sky in the background of spray trails. So, you know, we see it in kids' films. We see it in advertisements. It's just conditioning, period. Resource wars. This is important to remember because it's all connected. Everything's connected. What we see happening in Ukraine, what we saw happening in Iraq, this is all about resources, period. If Iraq's export was carrots, I don't think we would have gone. And the bottom line is this is ramping up very, very quickly. We have peak oil was probably passed in 2006. Fracking is an absolutely false hope. It's destroying the groundwater. It's a very short-lived gain for a forever loss. So resource wars are happening now, and it's going to escalate very quickly. Former BP geologist, peak oil is here. Again, it appears that it happened in 2006. And what happens if anybody's ever heard of Hubert's Peak? In the 50s, a scientist predicted that the U.S. would hit peak oil about 72, I believe. he was laughed out of the industry, and he was right. And that's what we have here. When you have an industry that wants to only see what they want to see, someone telling the truth doesn't get very far. How about per capita availability of food grains declines in the last decade? It's not getting better, it's getting worse fast. Kansas wheat harvests, I think, are going to be about half. You drive them down the I-5 corridor, as I just did, you see dead trees all over. The dead branches sticking out, trees are dropping foliage. Yes, the drought's a factor. Yes, the bioavailable metals in the rain is a factor, and there's no question they're there. We've done 70 lab tests in Shasta County. There's no question. Aluminum, barium, strontium, those metals are in the rain. That's an effect. And we have UV that's off the charts, and that's one of the biggest effects with the trees dropping foliage. They can't take the intense UV, period. Right beneath your feet, the hidden reality of deep underground military bases. Again, fact. And we would have so many people in our society that would say, they write all this off. It's conspiracy theory. They're like Pavlov's dogs, just simply trained to react when someone says something that threatens the official narrative. You're fringe, you're out there. This is going on right now, period. The military's digging in. We called Mountain House Foods 2 years ago and talked to some of the management when they weren't selling retail for a while, because guess who was buying it all? The U.S. military. They're stocking up for something, and clearly this is going on. Underground, it's again, DUM is the acronym, Deep Underground Military Base. Look it up. These are real. The acronym fits. It certainly fits.
What's it called?
DUM. They're called DUMs, Deep Underground Military Bases. So there we have one entrance. There we have another entrance. There we have an actual military insignia on one. They call these moles. These giant tunnel boring machines are called moles. Now, the paradox is, again, they can dig as deep a hole as they want. If we continue to do what we're doing to the planet, it's game over. It's game over. We have previous events like the PETM event, Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 55 million years ago, methane mass expulsion, with methane reservoirs that were thought to be not as large as what's releasing right now in the Laptev Sea, which may be as much as 10,000 gigatons. If 1/2 of 1%, try to get your arms around this, 1/2 of 1% of that 10,000 gigatons releases, that would be a 400% increase on the total greenhouse gas effect because of methane's intense warming characteristics. So that puts it into perspective. There's enough methane in the Arctic alone to exterminate life on Earth perhaps dozens of times over, and you can't live in a hole for that long. Their equilibrium periods after the PETM event were 10 to 20 million years. So at this point, I believe the power structure thought they could manipulate the weather indefinitely without consequence, which is what psychopathic people think. And now that the ship's going down, they appear to be just trying to mire populations in weather catastrophes and confusing events that confuse people, whether it's cooling or warming, and just simply trying to keep certain things out of the public consciousness for as long as possible. You see the size of some of these moles. Again, that's what they're called, moles. Now, you look at the size of that. It's astoundingly large. It looks like something out of a science fiction movie, but this is the kind of things that's going on that most people have not seen or have no idea is happening. No idea. An EMP attack, the weapon that could end life as we know it. Again, one more reason that perhaps they're going underground. So we have Fukushima going on right now. We all know that. We have, I believe there's about 400 nuclear facilities around the globe. I think there's a total of nearly 1,000 reactors because some facilities have more than one. So as we shred the ozone layer, and there's no question it's shredded, we have a massive northern hemisphere hole. If you look it up, you'll find the research data. You'll find that Canadian media covered that their government was threatening their scientists on the ozone monitoring programs with termination if they spoke to media. So you have this very open campaign of muzzling scientists. If we don't have enough natural protection and we have an EMP, electromagnetic pulse attack, that can shut down grids around the globe. If grids shut down, nuclear plants can't cool themselves. Now we have Fukushima times who knows how many. So that makes us vulnerable in one aspect. Now, after an EMP comes nuclear meltdown. Again, this is no secret. Our media certainly doesn't talk about it. And this gives an idea of the level of insanity we face. We have 3 reactors in China syndrome right now in Fukushima. 3. There's no question they have no technology to fix it. They have no idea how to deal with it. And there may be, we're getting news, I was on the phone to South America last night with General Bert Stubblebine, his wife. He's the highest ranking U.S. general to speak out about 9/11. And they're getting news from their sources from Fukushima that the reactor 4 fuel pool may have had a fire. Let's hope that's not the case, because that would be cataclysmic beyond imagination. But the bottom line is, with all this going on, what do we have Obama doing? Authorizing $6.5 billion to build some more nuke plants in Georgia. Now, if that doesn't make clear that there is no sanity in this equation, I don't know what does. Earth narrowly misses having a power grid wiped out by massive solar flare, a CME, coronal mass ejection. If we have a Kerrigan event now, with the ozone layer that's shredded in a horribly dilapidated grid system, again, grid shut down, nuke plants can't cool, game over. So how much sense does it make to continue spraying an atmosphere? And this is one of the excuses they give for the climate engineering, to provide a shield from a CME, while at the same time shredding our natural protection. So why don't we all just yank our teeth out and put some false teeth in, because maybe that's better. If we have natural protection, why wouldn't we use that? Why wouldn't we keep that? And we halt the Earth's hydrological cycle, destroy the ozone layer, toxify the soils with these programs. How much sense does that make? Solar flare could unleash nuclear holocaust across planet Earth. Again, I'm not making this stuff up. There's plenty in the scientific community discussing this. They know it's real, but they cannot get any media attention, period. Global geoengineering fueling Venus syndrome. Again, I encourage people to look this up. Venus syndrome is not a metaphor. It's the track we are actually on. And the difference is, when you hear scientists like James Hansen talk about this from NASA, and he's recognized around the globe, but he's not really telling it as it is, because the IPCC, the largest scientific panel on any subject in human history, does not include feedback loops in their climate modeling. How can that be? How can they not include some of the biggest modeling virtually useless? It's useless. It's pointless. This is not a linear equation. It's like someone saying, if you jump off a 200-foot cliff and you fall so far in the first foot, you're going to keep falling at that rate for the whole 200 feet. That's not how it works. You pick up momentum rapidly. So yeah, I'll go over that later when we're done, Joe. But if you look at Venus syndrome, bottom line is you'll find a lot of data that is the track we are on. That's a runaway greenhouse effect where our planet ends up looking like Venus. And Venus, by the way, isn't 900 degrees on the ground because it's closer to the sun. It's because it had a runaway greenhouse effect, and its atmosphere is 100 times more dense than ours. Venus was thought now to have oceans, and all things being equal, Venus would be about 25 degrees warmer because of its proximity to the sun, not 900 degrees. The premise with geoengineering, to increase the Earth's albedo, or the reflectivity. If that's the only factor with life, Venus would have life, but Venus doesn't have life. Venus's albedo is 2.5 times the albedo of Earth. It's 2.5 times more reflective. That's why it's so bright in the sky. But obviously no life there. So that's the short-sightedness of the climate engineering again. There we go. That's about how it is. Again, a sky full of trails, and that's about the society we live in. You know, and I just, at this point, the amount of people that would rather have a Big Mac and go watch a football game, all hell's breaking loose, I can't do it. How do we look at our children and do this? How do we look ourselves in the mirror? The further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those that speak it. I had to put this up because it's the case. And anybody of you that have ever tried to share this issue or anything else that's not comfortable for people, you know what it's like. You know what it's like when people roll their eyes and they go into their little comfort zone and they try to ridicule you for having the courage to try to share something that matters. Life has to be about something, doesn't it? I mean, if we're not here for the common good, what the hell are we here for? To watch American Idol? I mean, at this point, there has to be a purpose in it all. Now, when it comes to courage, and I remember this image the day it came out because that was so touching for me that I'm sure that man's probably dead. No, I'm sure it happened right afterward. But that's when a person comes to the point in their life when they know to preserve some semblance of honor and sanity means more than anything else, means more than anything. And when I see images like that, that's the sort of thing that just inspires us all, that if that man has the courage to face what he faced, all of us can have the courage no matter what sort of ridicule we get for the moment. And it won't be long. The ridicule won't last long because there are things that can't be hidden much longer. So those who have chosen to deny this issue will have to face it. But if that man can do that, I know I can go out and do this every day for the rest of my life. Again, a Palestinian boy throwing rocks at an Israeli tank. Same kind of courage. I saw a film, and this film is available online. And I'm not faulting all Israelis, but I am faulting their government. I saw a film of 5 Israeli soldiers holding a boy just like that, 5 of them, turned his elbow. You can find this online. It's on a film called Peace Propaganda in the Promised Land. Turning his elbow upright and raining about a 50-pound rock down on it, shattering his elbow backwards because he threw a rock at their tank. So, you know, this is the kind of world we live in, but the bottom line is these images to me inspire courage, absolute courage. Why did the Census Bureau award a $500 million contract to Lockheed Martin Corporation to GPS every single one of our homes? Now, why did they do that? We should really ask ourselves that question. I couldn't find out why, and I tried. I tried the Census Bureau, couldn't find out. They hiked into my location twice to make sure they had my front door GPSed. Now, why would they need that? Many people don't even know this was done. Now, and why was a defense industry contractor doing this? I would argue this: we are perilously close to a total collapse of society. Our society is so incredibly finely balanced, and we have sacked the planet for resources, and when it comes, it's going to come fast and furious, and the power structure is preparing for that. They're absolutely preparing. And if you GPS everybody's doorstep, there must be a reason, right? How about drones? Is that perhaps a way for a few people to control many? When you feel that you're not safe inside your own home, that you've been GPSed, and this was done. This is not speculation, it was done. Do I know this is the reason they GPS? No, I don't know, but it sure as hell fits. It sure absolutely fits. So, and this fits as well. Now, why? There's a question on top. Why the hell is the Department of Agriculture buying submachine guns? Now, this was right on the USDA site, and we know Homeland Security. This is historical fact. They have purchased 2.2 billion rounds of 40 caliber hollow point ammunition. It's about 6.5 rounds for every single person in the continental U.S. Why would they need 2.2 billion rounds? And 40 caliber matches what the USDA just authorized for those offices that chose to pursue this to buy submachine guns. And you can look, this is on their site. We have the film capture from the USDA site. This is about 3 weeks old. Understanding denial as a defense mechanism. We live in a society that is totally immersed in denial from so many directions. Our society, modern society, you hear people talk, economists talk about such and such in 2040 and 2050, and it sort of sets a mindset that everything will somehow magically keep chugging along. Industrialized society is like a snake eating its own tail. And we published an article a while back, about a month ago, showing the car lots around the globe that have literally hundreds of thousands of unpurchased new cars, and they are keeping the manufacturers going because that's the only thing keeping the whole facade going. GM is literally, there's record of them buying their own cars, same with BMW, same with other companies, to keep their numbers up. A snake eating its own tail. That's what's happening right now. You have the Baltic Dry Index, all global shipping. It's in the basement. This is all the shipping containers, everything from everywhere to everywhere. It's not shipping. It's not happening. The only thing keeping anything afloat is printed, fed fiat money. It's all a facade. And people ask, where does the money come from for these climate programs? Where does it come from? It's from the central bankers. Where does it all come from? Why are the wars in Iraq happening, and now Libya, and then Syria, and then Iran? Because the U.S. has to have the dollar for the global reserve currency, or they can't print whatever the empire needs. And once the dollar is no longer the global reserve currency, the empire comes down, and it's happening now. And that, I would argue, that makes the power structure that much more dangerous. So we see right now in the last few weeks, again, the climate is spinning horribly out of control right now. The climate engineering is making a bad situation worse, and the power structure, again, for all these types of programs, if the dollar's not the global reserve currency, game over. But our society is totally in denial, and I would argue that's going to end soon, like it or not. Heads are going to get ripped out of the sand because there'll be no hiding from what's coming. How the PhDs have wrecked the world. Now, 2 months ago, I was in a forest in Shasta County with USDA scientists and congressional reps looking at a whole ridge of dead trees. And I asked the USDA rep if he saw any forest decline there. And without really flinching, he looked at me and said, no, he didn't see any problem. You know, and that kind of blatant, arrogant, completely unjustifiable lying is astounding to me. It's astounding. I've been in the field with other USDA soil scientists, taking soil pH tests, coming up with values 20 times higher than the historical norm because we had the USDA baselines with us. And they sheepishly look at me and say, what do you want us to do about it? Well, how about doing your job? How about public disclosure? We're seeing pH values in Shasta County routinely 10, 12 times above normal. Our normally acidic soils, 5.4, 5.6, are now 6.6. That's a magnitude of 10. It's like a Richter scale. So we're seeing aquatic insect life decline as measured by a U.S. Forest Service biologist in Siskiyou County in 10 years, seen a 90% decline, 90, a virtual crash. So the walls are closing in much faster than people realize. And we have a lot of people with PhDs, and this is an article we posted on Geoengineering Watch, who simply toe the line, who simply do what they're told. And I spoke to a Forest Service biologist about a month ago and asked her if they were monitoring the forest decline. She says, we don't see any decline. My dad was an arborist. I know trees. And there's no question trees are declining. There's study on it around the globe. Boreal forest in Alaska declined 30% mortality. So it's just simply lying. Will humans go extinct soon on the path we're on? Absolutely no question. If there's not a major change in direction, no question. In fact, you have scientists like Guy McPherson, he's a professor emeritus from UC Arizona. I know Guy. He's part of the AMIG group. His data is very solid. Guy gives life in the northern hemisphere 17 years. That doesn't mean everything's fine till then. It means nothing's left by that point in time. Now, will he be right? I don't know. I can't say, but I can say this. So far, his data has been more accurate than anyone else's. And when you have the feedback mechanisms kicking into place like the methane right now, I mean, this is an equation that is not on any of the other modeling. So do I know the guy's data is correct? Again, no, I don't. But I know this. If the best chance we would have is to stop hampering Earth's life support systems, period. Extinction is the rule, survival is the exception. This is from Carl Sagan, and this is a fact too. People have been trained to magically think that nothing can ever really go bad, and especially here in America, everything's always somewhere else. It's not happening to us or in our backyard. Not reality. The chickens are coming home to roost fast. Now, this is, again, I'm not usually much on theater, but this is an inevitability. These things we've been taught to think are only Hollywood. Infrastructure's falling apart. Why aren't they repairing infrastructures? Anybody wonder that? They're not doing much to really do that because they know that there's a lot bigger fish to fry. They know that what's coming is going to make all that a moot point. I mean, the fossil fuel paradigm alone is coming to an end by the day. So I would rather have this and still have a planet that supported life. I don't care about this sort of modern civilization. I'd rather have a planet that supports life still, so my children have a future, so the children of the globe have a future. So I don't need civilization per se, but I do need a planet that lives. Now this, again, this is the sort of skies we live under. And for me, life like this is intolerable. It's intolerable to live under a toxic cloud every day, and there's no question this metal's coming down on us. This has been our point with air quality people who want to argue contrails, chemtrails, and all this. Their job, if there's a contamination that's indisputable, and there is to disclose that, at least at minimum to disclose that. And we know there's a contamination. We've had snow samples off the side of Mount Shasta as measured by a Forest Service biologist with 61,000 parts per billion of aluminum. That never touched the surface of the ground, so they can't equate that to some soil contamination. I've had single rain events with 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum. Highly toxic. That's almost a 50,000% increase in a 5-year period. So the bottom line is this is not natural at all, and this is exactly what climate engineering describes. We know the material's falling on us, and if we continue to live under a toxic cloud, our days will be numbered. Now this, again, I'm not much into theater, but this is what a lot of people see. When you tell them things that they don't want to hear, that's what they see, and it's all too depressing, and they go about their way. But you can think of things like this as well. And I will never give up, ever. So long as there's a single tree standing, a single frog croaking, I will never give up. And if all of us remembered this and that we have a part in this play, and if we all work together, if we truly brought this to light, if we could do that, I would argue it's the single greatest shockwave we could cause around the globe. The geoengineering subject crosses all party lines, religious beliefs. No one wants to be sprayed like a rat. And if you make every single day your goal to move the ball forward, what can you do? From your own home computer, you don't need to go to meetings or presentations. From your own home computer, we have on Geoengineering Watch links that help you do this. One's activist suggestions and one's called Flaming Arrows. And the Flaming Arrow link, it's all prepared, a very thought out letter, the proper links that you can send out to groups, organizations, individuals that would care if they knew. And even if they don't acknowledge it at the moment, even if they reject it, they'll still know of the issue. And as the walls close in, and I promise you they're closing in fast, those seeds will sprout. So if all of us were launching flaming arrows, and we got others to launch these flaming arrows, and we held people accountable, when people in agencies want to blow this off as if they'll always go to the word chemtrails. Oh, we have a little NASA document that says chemtrails is a hoax. One, I'm not talking about chemtrails. The media always uses that term. We're talking about geoengineering, SAG, stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, SRM, solar radiation management, mountains of science, mountains. So you have to know the right terms, and you don't let them off the hook. And we have a site called Disinformation Directory right now to expose those people in agencies who are choosing to simply not investigate and lie and stay in their bubble. We're going to expose them. We're going to put their public emails out as well. Climate Engineering 101, this is off our site. So again, anybody who thinks that sky is normal is just simply living in an alternate universe. This is another tool. This is an important tool. This is a friend named George Barnes. He's a filmmaker who learned of this issue, never been an activist, but he decided he had to join the fight. This is an interactive app. There's an award-winning documentary at this app you can watch in entirety. The app was just updated, very technically advanced now. You can, wherever you're at, you can photograph the sky and it will automatically send it out to your legislatures in your area. The film was narrated by William Baldwin. It's won about a dozen awards so far. Great tool and great one to share with others. This is our site again, and this is our purpose, and it will remain my purpose until my last breath or until we have clean skies. I can't imagine a world this way indefinitely, and it won't go on this way. So the bottom line is no matter how dark the horizon looks, it's not black yet. And if all of us pulled together, if all of us united, and instead of living in despair, made every day an effort to move the ball forward, even with the few of us that are here, and we increased our numbers. The equation I always point out to people, if you introduce the subject to two people at the beginning of a 30-day month, effectively, with the flyers, the tools we have, and they two each the next day, and that carried on for 30 days, that's 5.5 million. And my math is correct on that, as astounding as that seems. So if we all pull together, and we are gaining ground, by the way, globally, the amount of people that are now getting onto this issue is increasing radically. We have Italian senators demanding disclosure. We have headlines in Malta. We have Swedish citizens suing their government. I've met recently with the head of one of the largest environmental consulting firms on the planet. They know this is going on. So, you know, they're trying to put their ducks in a row, if you will, before they address this issue. But if we could bring this to light, it would be the single greatest leap we could take in the right direction. So my gratitude to all of you who came. I hope we all pull together, and not in despair, but in the concerted effort to bring this issue to light. Thank you very much. Questions?
Did you invite the EPA, and are there any EPA people here?
I invited them. In fact, we were scheduled, we were approved to use the EPA's facility. And they must have Googled my name and found this didn't fit, perhaps, and we were canceled out. And they said, I believe the last memo I saw was no more non-agency people are to use their facility, ever. So that's how the system works. But again, for everybody in here that has maybe gotten discouraged because of the lack of people who want to give reality any acknowledgement, there will be no ignoring what we face for much longer. And so the seeds you plant will sprout. Just, you know, again, and it matters. If you reach a person, and I've had this happen too many times to count, and I don't know if to take this as a compliment or something else, when people come up and say, when I met you, I thought you were nuts. But now, I get it. And now they're passing out DVDs, and they're completely immersed in this. And how can that not matter? Regardless of what we face, how can that not matter? If any one of us affect a person's field of vision, if we affect their consciousness, if we help them to wake up, it has to matter. It absolutely has to matter. And if there's enough of us, at some point, we're going to reach critical mass, and I would argue that's a lot closer than we think, because a lot more people have heard about this than we might realize. They've heard about it, even if they're rejecting it. And it would take one or two events to put a break in the dam completely, and then it's over. This issue's out in the open. And I would argue once it's out in the open that we will have military families whose family members participating in these programs that now will have the whole family cornering them, asking them, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing? I already know this. I know of a congressional rep in Georgia, congressional candidate. Their family's in civil war because he has a brother engaged in this. So if we can just bring it to light, we'd be okay. Question?
Well, besides bringing it to light, but this is more like a federal level, how would you stop them from doing that?
Okay, the question is, we bring it to light, how will we stop them from doing it? That's the point I'm trying to get at, and I probably didn't finish my thought. So if we bring it to light and we have those that are participating, if their families know, if they know that participating in these programs is contributing to maybe their sons or daughters' autism, their grandparents' Alzheimer's, I would wager there's enough honorable men and women in the U.S. military that they would refuse to participate. Because right now, they're being told they're doing something for the common good. Guarantee you that's what they're being told. I talked to his KC-135 pilot. He didn't know what he was doing up there. And when he went back to ask questions, the last news I got from this pilot, it was through a friend, because he was hard to reach after that. He was medicated behind a desk. That's what happens when you ask questions, apparently. So if this couldn't be hidden, it would change everything. People would understand the full damage done to the climate. They would understand the peril that we all face and the fact that our paradigm is about to get turned on its head completely. And I would argue it will unite a population against the powers that be that have no right to do what they're doing. None. So if we could simply get this out in the open, I would argue the dominoes will fall on their own. Justice.
Well, how high are these planes going, and how could people, like if we see something in the sky, how do we find out where the planes came from, and
Flight Tracker.
can you find the airport or whatever? Or
Yes, you can track the planes. Flight Tracker 24. There's a couple of different internet ways to track these planes. One's called Flight Tracker 24. They are being tracked. In fact,
Oh, can you look on the internet?
yes, you can track them on the internet. If you Google Flight Tracker 24, I know that's one, and people are doing this. In fact, planes leaving particulate trails have been identified from KLM, Southwest, American, Lufthansa. The list goes on and on. Do we think these pilots are involved with this? No, we don't think so. These appear to be remotely controlled. We have patents for powder contrail generator assigned to the U.S. military, and I spoke to a head executive from Jeppesen. That's a subsidiary of Boeing. Jeppesen coordinates all global flights. Had a nice 15-minute conversation about the not so important things. The moment I mentioned geoengineering, he turned his back on me, walked away, and never looked back. And you know, the kind of people that engage in these jobs, knowing what they're about, and they're apparently sworn to secrecy on this, and it's inexcusable. And at this point, I believe society should view those involved with these programs knowingly as accomplices to a crime that is absolutely horrific in nature. And I got a letter last night from a very powerful Florida law firm that has outlined the provisions that are being broken by these. We have an attorney here with us today. Also, he can answer some questions perhaps later. But people are waking up, and the firm in Florida, their interest is in that they're being poisoned as well with the rest of us. And we know this is occurring. Every person we test is packed full of aluminum, packed. So that's hair test, urine test, blood test. There's no question this is going on. And the bottom line is, if we can't think cognitively, if we can't think clearly, how long will we be able to face any challenge? So this is simply a fight for everything at that point. Yes, sir.
I was Googling some geoengineering stuff, and an issue came up. It's the United Nations appointee group. Sorry, I can't remember the name of the group, but it's the United Nations group to watch climate warming. That's their goal. And they have come out recently and said, do not stop the geoengineering projects because the temperature will go up 3 to 5 degrees.
You're correct. And what we see, it's called double collapse scenario. And that's a scenario in which once you start climate engineering and you stop, you have a climate backlash. Is that a reality? Yes, it is a reality. We saw after 9/11 that we had, in 2 days, we had a 2-degree temperature rise in the U.S. This is a very unique opportunity that happened. In fact, if you look at our website, down in the middle, it's called Global Dimming. There's a link called Global Dimming. There's a 60-minute or 50-minute documentary done by BBC and Nova. Very good documentary. Do they talk about climate engineering? No, but it looked like the filmmakers knew about it. They just simply couldn't talk about it. But they documented after 9/11 when the air traffic stopped and you had a 2-degree temperature rise, that's clearly the aerosol settling out of the air. But what happens if that went on? Then the hydrological cycle would start to pick up again. What happens when you have extreme temperatures in a desert region for an extended time? Moisture shows up. And the hydrological cycle right now is being thwarted because the atmosphere carries about 7% more moisture for every degree of Fahrenheit warming. It's much warmer already. It should be raining much more. In fact, we know for the western U.S. in a recent era, 5.2 million years ago, I'm trying to think of the name of the era, but we had a carbon count of about 500 parts per billion, about up to 25% higher than now. And the western U.S. was lush. It wasn't a droughted out dust bowl. The atmosphere has to put out more moisture as it gets warmer, but that's being thwarted right now. And as the global dimming film dictates, when you don't have direct sunlight, that radically affects evaporation over the oceans. When you have the kind of grid spraying that I showed you, and you don't have the direct sunlight, it's affecting evaporation, it's affecting the hydrological cycle, affects the winds. So at this point, yes, there would be a climate backlash if they stop spraying, but that has to happen. I mean, it's like saying for the heroin addict, if you stop taking heroin, you're going to go through some rough withdrawals, and it's the same sort of circumstance. But what's our alternative? Are they going to? Is this really helping our situation? Don't we have enough data to know right now this is only harming us? So, although that's true, I believe it's our only course of action. Yes.
I think we all see the trails in the sky, but something I've been noticing for years are like filaments or fibers in trees and ground between buildings. Do you have anything to say about that?
We see that, and we have films of it happening where the whole landscape will be covered with these fibers. So what we think is happening, and we've tested some of those fibers. Now, unless spiders are using aluminum to make their webs, these are not spider webs because we've lab tested it. So, yeah, the polymers are harder to test for. So, but we have tested for aluminum and barium, and those samples are full of aluminum and barium. So we believe it's a mechanism malfunction where the polymer that mixes, and there's patents that call for these polymers to mix with the metals as they're ejected out the back of the plane. It appears something goes wrong. Landscapes are covered with that stuff, and so those dots fit together. We believe that's what's. Yes, yes.
And somebody asked me why somebody hasn't gone up high and captured some of the direct trails.
That's been brought up a lot, and some Norwegian researchers that I've worked with were trying to decipher a way to do that, and it's hard because we're talking about particles that are so small they go through any normal medium. They were trying to use some type of a water trap to go up on an aircraft, but I would argue this. Even if we had that test, and we could do it without having Homeland Security at the door immediately when we were done, it wouldn't change anything, I would argue, because those that don't believe what they see with their own eyes, film footage of it happening, the fact that our rain is full of metal, doesn't matter. They won't believe it. I mean, we're telling them their God is not their God. It's that simple, that the government is not here to protect them. There is nothing benevolent in these programs, nothing. And I've talked to people in the military that literally they've said this to me. Well, if our government's doing it, it must be for our good. How many examples of that do we need? I mean, Agent Orange, depleted uranium, the other biotest. I mean, that's a ridiculous notion, but it's just, a lot of people are not willing to face reality. An example I use for facing this issue, and a lot of people, again, that don't want to face it, if you're standing in the middle of the interstate, you're better off facing traffic. Isn't it true? I mean, if you're sitting out there in a lawn chair, are you better off facing traffic or turning your back to it? Face traffic. If a Greyhound's about to run me over, I want to at least see the grill. So the bottom line is, at least we can dodge, or at least we can do something. It's better off. You're better off facing your challenges in this regard. It's the only chance we have. So anyway, anybody else? Kurt?
The three films, what are they spraying, why in the world are they spraying, and there was supposed to be one called Who in the World is Spraying. Mr. Murphy is apparently out of the picture now. Is it still being made?
Not to my knowledge.
Tied into the, what information is there about the Illuminati being behind the U.S. government doing it?
They don't have any information that's not out there for everybody to see. I don't think that film's going to happen. Michael has had a bout with substance abuse that's got him completely out of the picture. I haven't spoken to him for a year and a half. But He did his best before he succumbed to that. And as far as the connection, I don't think it can be argued. I mean, what we see right now is we don't have a government in the sense that we've been trained to understand it. It's simply a global power structure that pulls the strings. But there's fighting now in the power structure. There appears to be infighting. I mean, again, the dollar's being demoted. You have, I think, within our own power structure fighting. It's like mafia families. Once there's not enough to go around, they start to fight. And that's in our favor. That's frankly in our favor. And the worse it gets, the better off we will probably be. But that film won't happen. But I would encourage anybody to you know, you can connect those dots on your own if you look. And we'll, as data comes out, and it's coming out so fast now, it's hard to keep up. It's really hard to keep up. We're facing a monster El Nino event right now that will probably make this year. That's why spraying's increasing all over. Everybody's reporting it. I mean, from Tasmania to New Zealand, I hear about this from everybody because they are simply going for broke. As the methane's spewing, the temperatures are rising, it's a runaway event. And what do? It's what they know how to do. Just try to hide it. Just like an example I often use is the Corexit in the Gulf of Mexico. How many of you know what Corexit is? It's a chemical that was used in the Gulf of Mexico. The point was to hide the oil spill. It wasn't to help it or and somehow mitigate it. It was just to hide it. And by some of the EIR reports, environmental impact reviews, it made that situation 52 times more toxic. But they used it. And there's some reports that they're still using it at the wellhead now, that it's still spewing. In fact, Matt Simmons, who is really was the independent global expert on deep sea drilling, he was on CNN. It's been, I don't know, 3 years ago, or he said something they didn't want him to say. He said that well is not capped, the seafloor is fissured, it's still leaking. He was dead the next night. He was found dead in his pool the next night. Look it up, it's historical fact. Is that a coincidence? He just forgot to swim the next night? So, I mean, when you step out of bounds, the power structure lowers the hammer. That's it. And that's why people don't talk. We had someone sitting over here from EPA. By the way, he's left now. You know, I'd hope that he might get up and say something, and you know, but I've been in EPA meetings. I think, Deb, I think you were in one of those meetings, weren't you?
Yeah, I organized.
Yeah, you put it together.
6 EPA people from the Air Resources Board.
Yep.
And
And what did they tell us? They told us that the system is rigged. In so many words. That's not their words, it's mine. But they made it clear that they're mandated to test for combustion particulates only. The rest of the sample goes out the window. And I've been told by another EP rep on a separate meeting I had, they don't care what's in the rain. I said, you don't care if there's depleted uranium in the rain? We don't care. We don't test for anything in the rain, nothing. I spoke to, gosh, I'll get right at you, Deb. I spoke to, now Fish and Game, the rep up north that I told you about has told me that Fish and Game has acknowledged on the record now that there is aluminum coming down the waterways. And I spoke to the California water quality person who, and I might have got that number from, yeah, anyway, I got the number, and asked about the rain testing. She made it clear to me, they're not gonna, that's one thing they're definitely not gonna test for. They're not gonna test the rain. Well, where does runoff come from? Where's the first place you would look? They're not gonna test the rain. She made it abundantly clear. And there's no dealing with these people. And I met with a Park Service rep 2 months ago on the coast at Patrick's Point where the Sitka spruce are all dying. They're all dying. And I said, are you guys studying the tree decline? And same kind of, it's like, you know, what kind of Kool-Aid are they drinking? She said, oh no, the trees, we have a lot of trees. That's exactly what she said. We have a lot of trees. Well, yeah, there's a lot of dead trees too, and they're all dying. I mean, they're falling over. The root systems are decaying. The bioavailable metals affects that. So, I mean, we're living in, it's like a B horror movie right now where people are just completely comatose. Let me get Deborah real quick.
What do you think the rank and file employees from these agencies like EPA and DFW and, you know, ARB that know something is up, what do you think they could do? How could they help you?
If they simply acknowledged it, that's all. We know, I've spoken in front of CARB, and there are, let me clarify, there are definitely some very good public employees that are trying to sound the alarm. There absolutely is. And I salute them the most because they have tremendous courage given the arenas that they're in. And if we could simply have these agencies acknowledge this reality and the public at large really understood the gravity of it, I would argue the dominoes will begin to fall. They'll begin to fall. When they realize that their children are being poisoned with this, you're going to have mothers livid around the globe, and it's affecting everything. The farmers, we're trying to reach the farmers. There's a farming paper that I just spoke to here today, that they're just posting an article I gave to them, it's going to reach 20,000 farmers. We're getting closer. There's fissures in the dam developing everywhere. Once one of them goes, it's gone. It's gone. This will be out in the open. And I would argue the power structure is going to be very, very dangerous then, because they know they're in a corner then, for sure. But we have to, it has to happen. It absolutely has to happen. We have to get this out in the open. And we face, again, like the sea level rise, if you guys saw there, that was listed, NASA has said as of 4 weeks ago, again, that we're locked into 15 feet of sea level rise globally. That's a lie.
Over how long?
Okay, and that's the point. Yeah, you said, Roger, this is the point. They say locked into 15 feet. Well, what would stop it at 15 feet? Again, the argument I make is if someone shoved you off a 240-foot cliff, and that's how much sea level rise we're looking at when all the cryosphere is gone, why would you stop 15 feet down magically? You're not going to stop. We have about 197 to 200 feet of sea level rise locked into Antarctica, about 24 feet locked into Greenland, and 10 to 15 feet in the rest of the Earth's glaciers. Now, Antarctica is going to take a while to go, but it's a very nonlinear equation. And we've been saying this for years. I've been saying it for years because the data supports that. And so now we have all these PhDs suddenly announcing that, oh, gee, all our modeling was wrong. We all knew it was wrong. It's like the WMD in Iraq. We knew it wasn't there. We had the head inspector saying there's no weapons here. I knew. You're telling me that the officials didn't know? Of course they knew. So right now, we have, why are they trying to hide it so much and there's so much spin? And because once everybody along these coastlines realizes that, hey, they're going to be underwater before too long, and it's happening much faster than they thought, real estate goes down, the whole machine starts to shut off. We have resources that are depleting right now. I mean, from every direction, things are closing in. But the one thing we could do that would matter more than anything else, if we could bring this to light and society could have its bubble popped and realize this party's over in the manner it's been. It's over. And I showed that image there of the Grim Reaper, because the radio announcers, that's what they call me, because my message is not what they want to hear. It's not what their listeners necessarily want to hear. A lot of people want you to tell them, if you just go buy a couple solar panels, buy a Prius, everything will be fine. That's not reality. Exactly. And the quote-unquote environmentalists, if you will, and nobody cares about the environment more than me. I mean, I've given my life to environmental issues, but you have to face, when the house is burning down, you have to face that. You don't go out and start trimming the hedge when the house is burning down. You don't paint the eaves. You put the house out. And the environmentalists right now are absolutely, and I don't want to put them all in the same category. Obviously, there's a lot of concerned people here. But they're the most apathetic of all. I had a meeting with the head of Sierra Club in Northern California about 2 weeks ago, and I've had enough of him. I've given him data for 5 years. He's done nothing, and I cornered him there, and he finally walked away. I said, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Why are you not addressing this issue? And they didn't want to hear it. Same with Greenpeace, same with ETC. They're bought, sold, and paid for, period. So back to the disinformation directory. We're exposing these people. We're letting the public know that they know, that we've told them. Even Democracy Now! Or if anybody knows what that is, Amy Goodman, bought, sold, and paid for. I used to support Amy Goodman to the tune of about $15,000 out of my own pocket, airing her shows at my own expense. I've met Amy twice. Not a nice person. Sorry to say, but she's not a nice person, and she is absolutely bought, sold, and paid for by the Ford Foundation. I know that because I know people who work with her. And here's the problem. This is her opinion. If anybody doesn't know who this is the largest independent news program out there called Democracy Now! Her opinion is, well, at least I'm getting some truth out. That doesn't get it. When you're ignoring the biggest stories out there and your followers think that if it was happening, you would tell them, and you're not telling them, you're lying. You're lying by omission. And so now I've sent Democracy Now!, Free Speech TV DVDs that they said they would air. They won't even answer the calls anymore. They won't answer at all. So we have a lot of people that are trying to make themselves feel good and at the same time deceiving anybody who believes in them. So the bottom line is, though, for all of us, even though we're a small minority, the dent we can make in this equation is huge. If we simply, again, back to my grim message, I try to end with this, though. Any one of us here could be the pebble that causes the landslide that breaks the dam of silence. Any of us could, depending on who you reach and who they reach and so forth. And because things are happening so fast, and there's no hiding from this, your efforts are not in vain. They're not in vain. People will have to wake up and face this. Anybody else?
There was St. Uger, who's the young Turk on current TV. I think he came out. He was the only one that said that government told us we can't talk about chemtrails. Whoa. Have you heard about that?
When did that happen?
I think it was about 4, 5, 6 months ago, St. Uger.
If anybody gets a link, if you see anything like that, I'd appreciate it if anybody can send it to me at geoengineeringwatch.org. I'll get to that mail. You know, I'm sometimes late getting at it, but any link you think I might have missed, I'd like to see it. I really would like to see it. So, but it's all of us working together that matters. Jeannie?
Well, you know, I never thought I would say this, and I'm so sad that I say it, because when I first heard the depopulation, the idea that there were people in power who wanted to depopulate the earth, I thought, oh, come on, I'll believe everything else, but I can't believe that. But when we look at the effects of geoengineering, which if you know, they know, like you said about WMDs, if we knew, they knew. And if you look at GMOs, unfortunately, I begin to think there is that desire to, since we can't get more resources, we can at least lower the number of people using the resources dramatically.
I don't think there's any question about that, and I'm careful not to, you know, I was hopeful this, you know, sometimes a little break in the dam, like this EPA guy that was here, I was trying to maybe not shut him off completely. Maybe he'll go back and maybe there'll be a fire start, who knows, but what Jeannie's saying is right. We can't ignore this. Certainly we know, they know, the planet won't support this many people, and it won't. You meet a lot of people in the environmental community that think, oh, we can all have a garden in our front yard, we can support 20 billion people. This is not reality. It's not reality. But the bottom line is, if somebody needs to go, the global elite should be first off the plank. And are they trying to contaminate us? Is that a part of the factor? Absolutely appears to be a part of the factor. We've had the Carnicom Institute, and I know some of those people, they're solid researchers. They're finding in samples what they can only describe as engineered pathogens. The pathogens that display characteristics of fungi, virus, bacteria. You know, there's quite a bit of criteria they use to identify this. And why would we think they're not biologically testing? We know that they have repeatedly. You know, I saw KC-135 over Redding on a rare night when Redding had a blanket of fog on it. I was on a mountaintop in the middle of the wilderness, which I sometimes sit up there all night and just think this stuff through. 5,000 feet off the deck, dumping. Now what's he doing there? A tanker dumping something over the population at night in the winter? It's not weather modification. And there's no question he was dumping, and he's leaving a plume behind him like that jet at the beginning of the presentation. So they know what's going on. And the bottom line is the sicker we become, the less cognitively we think, the less able we are to fight back, protest. I mean, all these dots fit. So the bottom line is, as the Chinese saying goes, may you live in interesting times, and so we do. So let's make our time count. And we may yet affect this equation in a very profound way if we all pull together.
I also believe that vaccines are used in that purpose as well.
I don't think there's any question about that. And you start combining mercury in the vaccines with, we know we have synergistic toxicity where these metals are all harmful by themselves. You mix them, exponentially more harmful. So yes, it's a bad mix. We're swimming in a sea of insanity. It's a virtual circus of insanity right now. But it's coming to a head. So again, I say we sound the alarm, and those that aren't listening will soon. They will. So.
Yeah, is the spraying mainly in NATO countries? I've heard that said with the full geoengineering program, that basically all the NATO countries have blocked.
Russia and China appear to have been involved too. Russia appears to maybe be trying to disclose it somewhat. They actually asked the IPCC to address the issue last fall. I just again spoke to Rima LeBeau, which is General Bert Stubblebine's wife, last night. I did her 2-hour radio show in South America. She said they're being hammered. And she's a very robust woman. She said she was so weak yesterday, and she can't attribute it to anything else. She said they're being absolutely pounded like never before, and she was significantly she was tired, fatigued, symptoms she has never had. I hear about this from all over the globe. They're in Chile. Chile. Yep.
Because you have the blue on your map, the blue in the United States, South America had lower Chile, Argentina.
As you get closer to Antarctica, you see a lot more spraying there too, because they're focusing on the poles are so important for the overall albedo, and they have clearly focused on the poles. And by the way, we're at record low ice extent right now. Any of you remember the headlines last fall that said the ice had recovered 50%? Remember that? Yeah. Absolute lie. Absolute lie. That statistic came from this. They surface area, which is not the mass, had blown into a slushy. There was 3 major cyclones in the Arctic last year, so it basically blew the ice down into a slushy. We know they're ice nucleating. We know they are. We just had, on Lake Michigan, I posted an article on this 2 days ago. There was ice floating everywhere with 85-degree temperatures on shore. The lake temperatures are far above freezing. What the hell is that ice doing there? We had the same thing in Northern California. We had ice on our ponds with pond water 40 degrees, nighttime lows of 40 degrees, daytime highs of 65. How is that possible? Artificial ice nucleation, that's how it's possible. So the Arctic ice had blown into a slushy. The mass was 19% of the 30-year norm last fall. All-time record low. The media didn't say anything about that. They simply said the ice had increased 50% from 2012. Well, 2012 was the lowest year ever recorded. There was almost no ice. So 50% over almost nothing is not very much. And so this is how they get these figures. And so this is where people, right now what I'm trying to instill in people, those who think that mainstream media is trying to convince them it's warming now, not true. Not true. It was true, not true now. Power structure is simply trying to hide the severity of what's going on as long as they can while they dig as many holes as they can and get ready for total collapse. That's what's going on. So right now we're at record ice lows, temperatures off the charts, methane spewing, breaking up some of the multi-year ice. It's a very good chance we will have an ice-free Arctic this year or next in the summer. Summer ice-free Arctic. It will still refreeze in the winter. You have the powers right now setting up in the Arctic because they know they're going to have access, and they don't seem to care that the ship's going down. Again, an example I've used before, it's like pirates when a ship's going down, and they're all grabbing the loot. What are they going to do with it when the whole ship goes down, right? So anyway, if that event happens, if there's a silver lining, they can't hide that. We have an ice-free Arctic. I don't care how much spin you put. You can't hide that. If they can't hide that. They can't hide this. All of a sudden, our paradigm changes. We're close to that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Snowden's information, did any of that,
Did he cover this issue?
reflect on or give information
Yes.
about you? And I think some of the newspapers are only giving out certain percentages of that information. You know, they didn't,
No.
not releasing everything, and they said they had to check with every, different agencies to make sure that it's not, going to compromise what's going on. Have any, like.
It's kind of farcical.
Have any of them
Yeah.
come out with any information from Snowden's, that they have access to?
Not on geoengineering, not any major publications, but one did, and I believe the data was accurate. Snowden did release data on geoengineering.
What publication was that?
It's the UK Mail, I think. It's one of their publications. And if you look up Snowden, geoengineering, chemtrails, you'll find something. And I believe that data.
With Snowden and chemtrails
Yeah.
and so forth?
Yeah, you'll find something. What he said was exactly what I would expect a government document to say. That this is their crown jewel. I think it said that. That was Snowden's word, that the climate engineering was the crown jewel of the military. And that if they stopped, the climate in the U.S. would spin out of control within a year. So in other words, that's exactly what you'd expect them to tell other people in the military, right? They're not going to say, hey, we're completely jacking the climate up and waging weather warfare on our own population. They're going to say, if we don't do this, everything's going to be bad, right? So I believe the document was authentic. I believe Snowden said what he could, and he also said that he didn't disclose any further because he felt people would be killed. That if he went into further names or other things, that maybe he would have been killed. I don't know, but he did cover the issue. And again, this elephant in the room is so massive that I mean, right now our skies are so horrific, it's everywhere, and at a certain point, if we reach the 100th monkey, there'll be a massive awakening to this issue. But all of us need to start those spot fires. It matters. Everywhere you start a spot fire, it'll eventually have the right conditions and it'll start to blaze. And they'll tell others, and I've seen it happen a lot of times. And we're at a very unique time in human history, and there is no greater fight than this. There's no greater battle, period.
Thank you, Dane. Thank you.
Thank you. period. Ice reflects about 90% of the sun's incoming thermal energy. Seawater absorbs 90+%, 93% according to this chart. So once we lose the ice, the ocean heats exponentially faster. As the oceans heat, methane hydrate is releasing from the sea floor. It's happening now. The East Laptev Sea in the Arctic is moving closer to a methane geyser. In fact, it's there already. So the more ice we lose, the more the water heats, the more methane releases, which is covering the planet like a layer of glass. Methane is 100 times more potent than CO2 over a 10-year time horizon. You'll always hear the scientific community referring to it as being 20 times more potent. That's over a 100-year time horizon. We're looking at much more immediate time frames. So methane escape could seal the fate of life on Earth if enough methane gets out, and we're headed that direction now. Again, in the illustration, methane deposits on the seafloor, ocean heats, methane surfaces. This also acidifies the ocean, also contributes to the fish die-offs, of which we've seen dozens around the globe this month alone. This is a chart on atmospheric methane. You see from 1951 to 1980, the chart on your right, and we see as of even November 10, and it's much worse now even, you see how much more dark color you have. Methane is saturating the atmosphere at absolutely unprecedented speed right now. This is a headline from about 3 weeks ago. Didn't get much airtime on public media, which should be of interest to people. CNN gave this story 15 seconds, and then they went on to 10 minutes of Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton. So they have 10 minutes for that, but they only have 15 seconds to say, oh, by the way, we're locked into at least 15 feet of sea level rise. 80 of the world's top 100 cities, or largest 100 cities, are now virtually doomed. So again, it shows the media has moved away from trying to pronounce global warming and simply to try to hide it. That helps to sell geoengineering, helps to keep the populations calm so that they're not worried about their Florida McMansion on the coast going underwater. That's where we're headed. There's no question about that. It's already a problem in many island nations around the globe. HARP, and we have a lot of stories from the government trying to downplay the use of these installations. If they're not using them, why are they still building so many? In fact, we just see there's protests in Japan right now because in Kyoto, Japan, the U.S. military is installing a base with another SBX radar system, which we believe is a part of the overall global network of these systems to help manipulate weather. This is happening right now in Kyoto. So clearly they're using these installations because we know this. We know this over Shasta County. We have east-west massive spray plumes, and we have no east-west traffic ever. We have 10 times the amount of aircraft in the air, literally, on days when we see that in our skies. So again, there's no speculation. We have film of this going on. This man I felt was very touching, and because people around the world are being harmed horrifically from a lack of rain. And we know the aerosols cause this lack of rain. The science is extremely clear on this. When you aerosolize the atmosphere, too many condensation nuclei affects the hydrological cycle radically. That rain that doesn't fall in one place tends to migrate somewhere else and come down in a deluge. We see this as well. We have the drought and deluge cycle intensifying around the globe. And a lot of causes for this, again, I'm not saying climate engineering is the only cause for a disrupted hydrological cycle by any means. But in fact, if we look mathematically, it appears to be the single greatest cause for a disruption in the hydrological cycle. Around the globe, I don't know if any of you have seen in Bosnia, Serbia, we've had massive, massive flooding. Also China, which not even the Chinese news is covering, 25,000 homes just wiped out. And the Chinese news isn't even covering this. Again, they're trying to hide this issue as much as they can. That's the sort of planet we're heading for, again, as the hydrological cycle is disrupted, ozone layer is shredded. We are on track for something now called Venus syndrome. I'll elaborate on that in a while. This is a picture from Bosnia. This just happened. Now, the Bosnian people, I can tell you this and I have contacts there. They believe that they are the victims of weather warfare. They absolutely believe this. They have ionosphere heater installations in Bosnia and Serbia that they know of now. The people are quite aware there. So when you have ionosphere heaters whose purpose appears to be to manipulate weather patterns in the jet stream, why would they not think this? And they've been hit with absolutely unprecedented flooding. People who think this isn't going on, this is all fringe, and certainly our society's been trained to think that anything that's not the official narrative is fringe. We have record of John F. Kennedy talking about weather control in 1961, 53 years ago. This is historical record, historical fact. I have an 80-page document from the NASA archives. outlining the U.S. weather mod programs as of 1966 with budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars for anybody to look at. Media chooses not to. Weather as a force multiplier, many of you have heard of this document, but this is a research paper outlining the U.S. military's goal to, quote, own the weather, period, as a force multiplier. Weather warfare has always been sought after by the militaries. Now, to try to quantify how fast the planet's warming, again, there's no debate. The reality is what it is, and no matter what argument anybody presents, those are the facts, period. It's not about liking Al Gore. It's not about wanting carbon credits. It's about reality. The planet's warming at absolutely unprecedented speed, equivalent to 4 Hiroshima bombs every second. That's about 400,000 a day. Try to get your arms around how fast the planet's warming. It's difficult to, but that's statistical fact. Now, everybody remembers the polar vortex, and this is an image from January 6th, and you see the cold zone pressed down into just those areas, and we've seen jet stream patterns that are absolutely unprecedented. You have the meteorological community scratching their heads about this, but when we have enough data to know that the ionosphere heaters can in fact heat the ionosphere, and that can in fact steer the jet stream, why would we think this is not going on? And the people in the East think that the whole world is cold. You can see the whole world is not cold. You have a very cold zone in the eastern U.S., and I think that was part of the plan to skew media in that direction. Now, these are temperature graphs. This is from the Arctic Methane Emergency Group. It's a group of scientists that are sounding the alarm. And you must sift the baby from the bathwater, because although the Arctic Methane Emergency Group data is accurate, they're calling for geoengineering, many of them, as if it hasn't been going on for 60 years already. Everyone has to learn to sift the baby from the bathwater, but that doesn't mean that their data and their projections are not accurate, because they appear to be some of the most accurate. And what this shows is we could be looking at a 6-7 degrees C temperature rise by 2030. And right now what we see, every place we monitor, we're seeing an underreporting of temperatures, 3, 4, 5 degrees lower than the actual temperature on the ground. So it appears already it's much harder than we're being told. Now, this is Arctic ice breakup. I want you to look at the sky, because it appears that they've been geoengineering heavily over the poles for probably as much as 6 decades. We have studies even from Stanford from the 50s talking about an Arctic haze and metallic particles detected, and they could not determine where those particles were coming from. Does the left hand not know what the right hand is doing? And we know these programs were going on back that far. We have patents for chemical ice nucleation assigned to the U.S. military going back to 1950. So when we have skies like that, we see the same thing here now, aerosolization. Why would they do this over the poles? Because we're losing Earth's albedo. The ice on both poles is the regulating mechanism for the planet. My name is Dane Wigington, Geoengineering Watchdog of our site. I think a lot of you are familiar with that. This is not a job I wanted. It's simply something I felt had to be done once I became aware of what was happening in the skies above our heads. A lot of people are trying to ignore this issue right now. Based on how fast things are unraveling, they will not be able to ignore things for much longer. The point of this presentation today, denial, deception, the last chance for life on Earth. For many, that might sound very alarmist and very theatrical. It's not. It's not. If we look at hard data right now, it is astounding how quickly things are unfolding, and we are not being told. So I'll elaborate further as we go into the presentation. As we see aircraft like this, normal condensation trails do not immediately emit from the back of an aircraft, and certainly they're not plumes like that. There's a cooling zone between the back of an aircraft and a normal condensation trail, and the high bypass turbofan jet engine by design is not conducive to producing such trails. So again, when we have trails like that, we know that that's not condensation. You can't slice a bit out of the middle of a trail. This film footage here is very compelling. It's from a site called Tanker Enemy in Italy. If you look closely, there are 2 jets there, not 1. They're AWAC tankers. One turns off. Keep watching. Gets more compelling. And this is where the argument ends. People ask, how do you prove this? How can I prove it to someone who doesn't want to listen? We have film footage of them spraying, period. You can see the other aircraft there. See the wing and the plume? Keep watching. This is how we prove it. Because we have film footage of these aircraft spraying at altitude, period. End of the argument. It's over. Now, anybody who says that's a condensation trail is simply in another reality. It's not condensation. We know this is happening. It's the biggest elephant in the room right now. It's the biggest untold story on the planet. Words from a dying Earth. Yes. From a dying planet. Is our planet dying? Yes. Our planet's absolutely dying, very rapidly. And there's a great deal of things fueling the fire. I chose this issue because it's simply the largest single assault on all life on Earth, bar none. There's a lot of challenges we face, but climate engineering is quantitatively doing the most damage of all. Earth threatened with 6 mass extinction. We are in the 6th great mass extinction now, today. This is a statistical fact. It's not projection, it's not theory. We're losing some 200 species a day of plant and animal right now. That's 10,000 times background extinction rate. Now, a lot of people in the anti-climate engineering movement want to believe that there's nothing wrong with the planet, there's no warming, it's all a hoax, it's only the spraying. This is simply not true. Too many people want to think dichotomously. It's either a this or that equation. That's not reality. There's so many sources of anthropogenic damage to the planet, one could never quantify it. Climate engineering, again, I believe is the largest single cause, but we put almost, I believe the latest figure is 100 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every single day. And anyone who thinks that's not a problem is not clear about reality. Climate engineering, again, is making a very bad situation exponentially worse, but it is by no means the only thing affecting the climate. That's about, I think we're 30 plus billion tons a year of CO2. 3 years since Fukushima nuclear power road to our extinction. Could Fukushima end life on Earth? Yes, it could. Right now, that situation is completely out of control. Again, I'm pointing out more forms of anthropogenic damage to the planet, and Fukushima certainly is. How is aerosol geoengineering making that worse? Aerosol geoengineering can migrate moisture a lot farther than it would have otherwise migrated. That could, in theory, migrate some of the fallout from Fukushima farther over the continental U.S. So, again, all things are tied together, but I'm pointing out that there's a great many forms of anthropogenic damage to our planet. Now, anybody that thinks that's normal or that that's commercial traffic, again, needs to rethink their reality. Nothing normal about that.